Imagine that your RBT is running the session. Everything looks fine until it isn't. The client throws some materials, kicks the table, and bolts to the door. Your RBT freezes. They scan the plan, they look at the data sheet, then they look at you. But what happens when you're not in the room? This moment, it's not about the protocol. It's about presence. It's about decision making. It's about judgment. Every BCBA has been there. The moment where you realize that your team can follow directions, but can't navigate the gray. They run a session, but they can't read the situation. And not because they aren't trying, but because no one taught them how. You want your RBTs to do more than just run plans. You want them to think critically, to act responsibly, and to adapt when real life happens. Y'all, that's what this CEU is for. We'll show you how to teach clinical judgment like any other behavior. You'll learn how to shape awareness, scaffold thinking, and give your team the tools to respond when the plans break down. Because when you're not in the room, they still need to be ready. Hey everyone, I'm Christy Wilson, the founder of Elevate Your ABA Supervision. I have been working in this field of behavior analysis since 2006, and I became certified as a behavior analyst in 2013. Over the years, I have had the privilege of supporting professionals across a wide variety of settings, but supervision is where my passion has always lied. I believe that when we invest intentionally in the growth of our RBTs and our colleagues, that we create a ripple effect that improves not only the service that we provide, but the culture of our entire field. My goal in this training is to share practical, experience-backed strategies that help you feel more confident, creative, and effective as a supervisor. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are doing such important work in this field, and honestly, I'm really excited to support you in it. So you've seen what happens when judgment isn't taught. So now let's talk about what you'll walk away with. By the end of this course, you'll be able to define and identify clinical judgment behaviors and your RBTs, support situational awareness using simple, teachable supervision strategies, coach reflective thinking without adding hours to your supervision, use scenario-based practice to build confidence and fluency in real-life decision-making. Now, these are not theoretical ideas. These are actually practical tools, and they fit into what you're already doing. They just help you do it in a better, more efficient way. Let me tell you about a supervision that I will never forget. One of my RBTs was working with a client who was often dysregulated during transitions. So one day, after an unexpected visitor came into the room, this client escalated very quickly. My RBT had a plan, and she followed it, but you could tell that something wasn't working. Instead of pushing through, she paused. She adjusted the environment, used a different prompt, and redirected the client to a familiar routine. The escalation was resolved within minutes. No one got hurt, and the rest of the session recovered without issue. When I asked this RBT what made her do that, she said, it felt like the plan wasn't the right move then. So I thought about what usually helps him calm down, and I tried that instead. Now that is clinical judgment. And she didn't learn that from just a protocol. She learned it from the work that we had done together, from our supervision experience, the conversations we had, the ways that we would debrief moments, and the little nudges toward awareness and trust in her observations. And you can build that in your team too, not through lectures, but through the way that you supervise every day. And this course is here to show you how. So before we dig in, for completing this course, you will earn supervision CEUs. You're going to get access to downloadable tools, a supervision planning template, reflection guides, and scenarios that you can work on implementing in your practice from the get-go. There's going to be a note section in there to share on your experiences and insights as you go along. And we're also going to look at clear and evidence-based informed strategies that can be used again, starting immediately. This course is self-paced and designed to layer onto what you're already doing supervision. This isn't to redo the work that you're doing. There's no major overhauls, just simple practices that can make a big difference to what you're already doing. It's about making the work that you're doing more efficient and more effective without adding more to your plate. So I want you to take notes, pause whenever you need, and use the downloadable tools to apply to what fits your context. Practice this as we go along so that you can start practicing the skills immediately. Most of all, I encourage you to stay curious because clinical judgment isn't about having all the answers. It's about learning to notice what matters most right when it does. So let's be honest. If this skill is so important, why aren't more of us teaching it? We know that the truth is most BCBAs want to teach their RBTs how to think critically, but we are up against so many odds. Back-to-back session demands, documentation overload, the pressure to get through programs quickly, a system that values technical fidelity over flexible judgment. And when we do try to coach decision-making, it's often reactive. Like, why didn't you do that? Next time you should. Just follow the protocol. None of this builds judgment, but it sure does build hesitation, right? So here's the reframe. You don't need more time. You need a structure for embedding this into what you're already doing. So this course is going to give you a language to model in the moment, prompts that you can build into your feedback, tools that you can share during supervisions. We're not adding work, y'all. We're shifting focus. So instead of telling RBTs what went wrong, we're going to teach them how to notice what matters. So let's look at 6 steps that are going to help us shift our approach from learning to leading your RBTs to clinical judgment making. First, you can't shape what you haven't defined. And here's the truth. Most of us have never actually defined clinical judgment in observable terms. We felt it, we valued it, we've expected it. But when it comes to teaching it, we fall back on vague phrases like, just use your judgment, trust your gut, you'll figure it out with that experience. That's not supervision. Y'all, that's wishful thinking. Clinical judgment is not a mysterious it factor that some people have or others don't. It's not instinct, it's not guesswork. And it's certainly not reserved for those with decades of experience. At its core, clinical judgment is a set of discriminations and decisions shaped by learning history and sharpened through intentional supervision. We define clinical judgment behaviorally as a repertoire of skills that include pausing before reacting, not just jumping to respond, especially under stress. Discriminating relevant environmental and client variables, recognizing the cues that matter, facial expression, latency changes, body language, and a caregiver's tone. Choosing a response based on context, not just protocol. Understanding that behavior plans provide structure, but don't always account for moment-to-moment variability. And explaining and justifying decisions using observable, measurable terms. Being able to say what you saw, what you interpreted, and why you acted in the way that you did. This means that we can observe clinical judgment. We can prompt it, we can model it, we can reinforce it, and we can shape it just like any other behavior. So think of it as kind of a situational fluency. A well-developed clinical judgment repertoire helps a behavior tech select the most relevant response, not just any correct response. And if we want our RBTs to build that fluency, we have to first identify the component skills, then create learning opportunities that allow these skills to develop over time. It is, in essence, what we should have always been doing, but now we're naming it, we're defining it, and we're shaping it on purpose. When we shape this as a teachable behavior, we shift from reacting to purposeful response. The field of behavior analysis has historically emphasized technical competence over contextual fluency. However, a growing body of research underscores the need to directly teach interpersonal and judgmental based skills as part of effective supervision. In the article titled The Softer Side of Supervision by Anzik and Kranick in 2020, they argue that behavior analytic professionalism, including clinical judgment, adaptability, and situational awareness, must be treated as teachable behaviors, not intangible qualities. They recommend using BST to teach these soft but essential skills. As we all know, BST includes 4 components: instruction, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback. This framework is especially effective when teaching the nuanced behaviors involved in clinical reasoning. The authors highlight that when BCBAs implement BST with fidelity, RBTs demonstrate improved performance, not just in task accuracy, but in moment-to-moment decision-making and professional behavior. This is echoed in some broader research as well. Parsons et al. In 2012 demonstrated that BST improves fidelity and generalization of staff performance, particularly in dynamic settings. And Reed et al. In 2020 found that modeling and feedback around client interactions significantly increased RBT's ability to respond flexibly when maintaining protocol integrity. So, in practice, this means that BCBAs must intentionally define what judgment behavior looks like in observable terms, model the behavior consistently during sessions, create space for RBTs to practice and reflect, and reinforce clinical reasoning, not just correct responses. It may feel like extra work, but it produces lasting professional behavior, and it benefits everyone. When supervision prioritizes modeling and shaping clinical judgment, RBTs feel more confident, less micromanaged, and more equipped to problem solve in real time. That kind of empowerment reduces decision fatigue, lowers the frequency of crisis level support, and minimizes burnout. For supervisors, investing in this process upfront creates downstream relief. Fewer reactive moments, less retraining, more time for refinement instead of repair. The cumulative effect? Lower stress, improved retention, and a team that doesn't rely on you to be the hero every time. This is supervision at its most effective. Not just shaping compliance, but building competence that protects the well-being of your entire team. As a supervisor, your job isn't just to monitor task completion. It's to develop situational awareness in your RBTs. This starts with sharpening your own ability to detect patterns, identify subtle client cues, and recognize when a technician is responding on autopilot rather than analyzing that moment. You're scanning for what the RBT sees, and more importantly, what they don't see. Ask yourself things like, what client behavior preceded a shift in engagement? What environmental variables changed just before the RBT acted? Or did the RBT notice contextual shifts or respond strictly based on protocol? All right, so here's some things that you as a supervisor could actively observe for. Any subtle withdrawal, change in tone, pacing, or increased vocalizations. Maybe there was a missed escalation cue. Any indicators of discomfort or frustration. Maybe your RBT continues with the protocol despite visible signs of dysregulation. Maybe there's some over-reliance on procedure, like ignoring any new variables that present themselves that require deviation from the norm. Maybe there's some post-incident confusion, like after the incident, your RBT appears unsure of what triggered the behavior or why the responses that they used didn't work. It's important to remember that these are not signs of failure. These are signs of opportunity, teachable moments. This is where you step in to model clinical judgment, not just correct your RBT's behavior, but to unpack what you saw and, more importantly, why it mattered. By identifying these teachable moments, you create learning loops that refine the RBT's ability to notice and respond over time. You're building more than just technical fluency. You're shaping a thinking practitioner. All right, so how do we model clinical judgment? Well, one way that our RBTs learn clinical judgment is by watching us as the supervisors exercise it over and over and over again with consistency and clarity. Modeling this skill doesn't mean that you're giving a lecture. It means embedding your reasoning for decision making into the natural flow of how you deliver services. So, being able to use your presence strategically. Narrate your thinking. Don't just explain what you did, explain why you did it. For example, I paused the demand because he tensed up. That's his typical escalation trigger. Another example might be, the caregiver just stepped out of the room. I decided to pause this skill until we could ensure follow-through support was there. So we're tying decisions to the environment, not just the protocol. So your RBTs should hear you referencing client signals, historical trends, and real-time variables, not just the plan. You want to explain your internal decision map. Say out loud the options that you considered and why you chose the ones that you did. So for example, I was deciding between prompting again or shifting to a different task. Because he had already escalated twice during this demand today, I chose to change it up a little. You're going to find that these micro models build fluency in how to think, not just what we do. So consider addressing these strategies. You could ask the RBT to predict your next step, then explain your choice and contrast it with what theirs was. You could also debrief critical moments using a think aloud format. What did they see? What did they think? And what were their options? Think about it and talk about it out loud. This collaborative reflection makes your clinical reasoning visible and learnable. By modeling in this way, you're teaching your RBTs how to pause, scan, and decide. And you normalize the uncertainty that can come along with that as a space for learning, not judgment. We know that this isn't easy. We just happen to be studying and practicing a lot longer than they have. I have found that the thinking out loud during sessions is one of my favorite, most effective tools that I have as a supervisor. Constantly, I'll narrate what I'm seeing, what I'm considering, and what options I'm weighing in real time. Then I invite my RBTs into the process by asking questions like, what do you think's going on here? If you were leading this session alone, what would you do next? What's something the client just did that might change our approach? These reflective prompts allow us to move from passive observation to active clinical discussion. The goal it's not to quiz them. It's to make our professional reasoning visible and collaborative. When we can normalize this ongoing dialogue, we reduce performance anxiety in our RBTs, which increases shared problem solving, and it elevates their sense of ownership and competence. So let's look at an example. Alicia is running a discrete trial. Her client, who's usually verbal, mutters under his breath and turns away. The program says to represent the SD. So she does this. And he screams and throws materials at her. So you intervene, everything de-escalates, and later on you ask, what did you notice before you represented? Alicia says to you, well, he turned away, but I wasn't sure what he meant. So you can respond, well, okay, that's fair. I've noticed that when he turns away like that, though, he's often overstimulated. That's why typically I'll take a pause or shift tasks when I see him do this. Moments like these matter, y'all. It's the chance to go deeper into the why of why we make the choices we do as clinicians. Rather than just naming the cue, we want to reflect on the reasoning behind the process as we're working with our RBTs. So in this instance, we want to help Alicia reconstruct the decision-making chain. First, what did she observe? Then, what could it have meant? And after that, what were the options that she had? And what did she choose and why? So we want to model our own clinical map. This could be an example of how we provide this to Alicia. When I saw him turn away and mumble, I paired this with what we know about his past behavior when he's under stress. I interpreted it as a cue that maybe he was overwhelmed, and that led me to pause rather than push through the trial. If you could rewind that moment, what might you do differently next time? What would help you catch that cue sooner? How can I help you to see that? So you guys, this reflection loop does more than just correct a missed opportunity. It teaches Alicia, our RBT, to build a reasoning process that can be used in similar situations because we know this isn't going to be the one and only situation she comes against. Every time that you stop to take a moment like this and slow things down for your RBT, you're shaping not just a technician, you're shaping a clinician. You're not correcting, you're translating your judgment into teachable cues. To make this real, I want you to take a moment to reflect on your own recent sessions. Think about a moment where you made a clinical decision that deviated from the written plan. And what were the observable cues that shaped your decision? Now, give it a try completing this reflection. Jot it down somewhere in your notes. When I saw, I interpreted it as, so I chose to, because. Then I want you to consider, how might you narrate this same decision to your RBT next time? What environmental or client variables helped guide your judgment? And what feedback could you provide to help your RBT begin to notice those same cues that you were clued into? Clinical judgment isn't a feeling. It's not a gut reaction. It's a practiced ability to interpret the situation and choose a contextually appropriate response, and then explain what the choice was that you made. When we define it this clearly and model it with consistency, we shift supervision from micromanagement to skill development. You're not creating rule followers anymore. You're building analysts in training. So I want you to check out your course workbook. There is a cheat sheet of common supervisor phrases in there that narrate judgment clearly and help your RBTs internalize the why behind their decisions. Take a look at that and see how you can implement into your practice. All right, step 2. We don't just want RBTs to make better choices. We want them to understand why they're making these choices. So reflection is where behavior begins to generalize. Reflective thinking is the process of reviewing past events, analyzing what happened, and generate insights to guide future behavior. So in our context, it means helping moving our RBTs from I followed the steps to I noticed something wasn't working and here's what I did about it. It's teaching them to self-evaluate, not just self-correct. This process supports metacognitive development, which is increasingly recognized in the supervision literature as critical to developing professional judgment. Reflective thinking aligns closely with the goals of effective supervision that Turner et al. In 2016 outlined when they emphasized the value of encouraging RBTs to think about why a procedure worked or didn't work, rather than just whether it was followed correctly. This shift in processing, it promotes long-term retention, adaptability, and clinical confidence. We want to coach reflective thinking. And by doing this, we are asking open-ended questions about what they noticed and why. We explore how they interpreted the client's behavior and validate their reasoning process, even if the outcome wasn't ideal. We also want to reinforce thoughtful analysis, not just the right answer. Over time, you'll see that this process not only builds RBT capacity for situational analysis, but it also increases their engagement and investment in the quality of their work. This kind of processing can lead to fewer repeated errors, greater confidence in new situations, more proactive problem solving, and stronger retention and resilience. These are all great things, right? So how do we coach this new behavior? Well, teaching reflective thinking isn't about giving a pop quiz at the end of the session. It's about creating structured moments for RBTs to slow down, examine their choices, and consider alternative approaches. So again, you're teaching them how to build that internal why engine. Begin with psychological safety, as everything else in supervision. Reflection can feel super vulnerable, especially if a session didn't go well. So we want to frame these discussions as learning opportunities, not evaluations. We want to ask open-ended, non-judgmental questions like, what do you think was going on there? What made you choose that response? Or how did your client respond? And did that match with what you expected to happen? We then want to put them or support them at pulling the situation apart using our very favorite ABC model. So what cues did you notice? What did you do in response? And then what happened afterwards? And what did that tell you? We want to reinforce the thought process, not just the outcome. So even if their action wasn't ideal, highlight what you noticed and how they reasoned. Then pair their reflections with your own. For example, you could say, here's what I saw, and here's what I was weighing. Does that align with what you were thinking? This collaborative debrief models clinical reasoning and shows your RBT that professional reflection isn't about being right. It's about being responsive, observant, and flexible. That's the mindset that we want to cultivate in our RBTs. That's what helps them grow. So have your RBT complete this session, this reflection after a session. When I noticed, I thought it might mean, so next time I might try. You can use a statement like this to start a coaching conversation. If done regularly, it becomes like a self-monitoring tool that can build internal fluency, reducing prompt dependency, and empowering your RBTs to evaluate their own work in real time. Over time, these small reflective exercises create a habit of clinical curiosity and flexible thinking that can transform both the quality of service and the RBT's sense of ownership in their role in working with your client. Now, reflective practice isn't just a nice to have. It's a powerful tool that supports both skill development and professional resilience. In our field, more and more research is supporting the idea that reflection should be a regular part of supervision. Parsons et al. In 2012 found that when supervisors pair reflection with modeling and feedback, their staff not only learn faster, but they also apply what they've learned in new and unexpected situations. In other words, they generalize. And that's where real behavior change happens. Reflective supervision doesn't just keep skills sharp. It strengthens confidence, ability, adaptability, and long-term problem solving. In addition to that previous research, Turner et al. In 2016 argued that reflective thinking improves clinical decision-making and supports long-term skill retention. Their research highlights the importance of structured opportunities for supervisees to assess not only what they did, but why they did it and how they might approach the situation differently next time. Research in related fields also supports this. In 1983, Schoen described the concept of reflection in action as a hallmark of professional competence, suggesting that effective practitioners engage in continuous, real-time analysis of their actions and outcomes. Integrating this principle into their supervision can strengthen a behavior technician's ability to adapt fluidly in dynamic environments. The more we embed reflection into routine supervision, the more we equip our RBTs to become independent, thoughtful decision makers. We're not just teaching them to act, we're teaching them to think. Sometimes we invite reflection and we get a blank stare, though. Not every RBT is immediately comfortable with this kind of thinking, and that's okay. Reflective thinking isn't always intuitive. Some RBTs haven't been taught how to pause, scan, interpret, and verbalize their decision-making process. That doesn't mean they're incapable. It means that they need scaffolding. So give this a try to support them. Start concrete. Instead of asking, what were you thinking? Try asking, what did you notice right before that behavior happened? Try giving options. Maybe offer 2 or 3 interpretations and ask which one that they think fits best. Try modeling your reasoning. Let them hear how you unpack a decision and connect cues to actions. Modeling is such a powerful tool. We know this. And something else that's really important to consider is normalizing uncertainty. We really, really want to make it safe to say, I'm not sure, and treat it as a starting point to continue developing and learning. You can also guide this process using a framework of graduated reflection. So maybe begin with a closed question, like, did you notice anything before that behavior? Move to a forced choice, like, did you think the overstimulation was there or was he just not ready yet? Then ask open-ended prompts, like, what would you try differently next time? Research backs this kind of gradual supportive coaching. Reed, Parsons, and Green in 2011 emphasized that we can't expect reflective fluency from the start, but it is a behavior that we can shape. So they showed us that when we use modeling and prompting to increase how often team members talk about their observations and reasoning, those behaviors started to grow. Even the smallest efforts, like getting someone to describe what they saw before a behavior, can open the door to deeper thinking. It's not about pushing for perfection. It's about inviting curiosity consistently. So as supervisors, our role is not to expect fluent reflection from the start, but to shape it deliberately with compassion, patience, and consistent opportunities to rehearse thinking out loud. So let's take a look at how this looks in real time. Jamal is working with a client who often resists transitioning from break time to structured task. This particular day, the client was fixated on his tablet and began to show signs of agitation when it was asked to be put away. So our RBT Jamal proceeded with transition prompts as written in the plan. Well, the client threw the tablet at him. Later on in supervision, the supervisor, you checked in with Jamal. Maybe you asked, what do you think was going on there when you gave that prompt? Jamal, he just shrugged. I don't know. I just did what the plan said. You, as your supervisor, rather than pushing for a deeper response, you just met him where he was. Totally fair. Want to hear what I noticed? So then you explain to him. So I noticed when you walked over, he started gripping the tablet tighter and stopped looking at you. Now that's something that I've seen right before he escalates. When we spot this, it might be a chance to switch gears or slow down the transition. So here you go. You're building the reflective thinking, right? You can continue to say. So let me give you 2 quick options. One is to pause and offer a 10-second countdown, where the other, maybe you want to sing the cleanup song. Do you think that either one of these would have worked a little bit better with him today? It's super cool when you see Jamal think for a moment. He liked the countdown idea, so he tells you, probably a countdown. Personally, y'all, that's what I would have done too. But it's also important to ask Jamal, why do you think that that one might have worked? Now, Jamal knows his client, so he responds, you're not just correcting his actions, you're shaping his reasoning. Remember that here. You're showing Jamal how to reflect without judgment so that next time he'll start to scan for those same cues on his own. Now, this is how we build reflection deliberately with scaffolding, respect, and patience. Now, I want you to remember the ability to think reflectively doesn't emerge overnight. It obviously doesn't need to either. Just like any other behavior we want to shape, we want it to be reflective, which requires consistent opportunity to practice. We want to reinforce for effort and use our tools of scaffolding to meet our learners where they are. We do this with our clients. Why wouldn't we do this with our RBTs? When we take the time to coach reflection, we give our RBTs something far more powerful than just another procedural skill. We give them the ability to learn from their own experiences. We can trust, we build trust, confidence, and clinical agility. And we remind them that good supervision isn't always about having the right answer. It's about being open enough to ask good questions. Now, I want you to check out your course workbook for a printable template to support weekly reflective discussions. This includes a guided prompt, space for you to share your insights, and a section for even celebrating clinical wins. Go take a look at it. All right, here we are at step 3. Now, we can't expect our RBTs to take initiative or make good decisions under pressure if we haven't created an environment that makes it safe to try, reflect, and adjust. Supervision isn't just about compliance. It's about building capacity. That only happens when RBTs know that they won't be punished for trying thoughtfully, even if it doesn't go well. A safety net in supervision refers to the intentional structures, relationships, and verbal cues that signal to our RBTs it's safest to think, to try, and to grow, even if it's messy. This concept aligns with Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. She emphasizes that people perform at their best when they feel safe to take interpersonal risks without fear of embarrassment or punishment. When we bring this into the context of ABA supervision, a safety net becomes a behavioral framework for reinforcing risk-tolerant, initiative-taking behaviors in our RBTs. This safety net doesn't mean that we overlook errors. It means that we are defining boundaries while celebrating effort, inquiry, and sound clinical reasoning, even when the outcome isn't perfect. When our RBTs trust that the environment is safe for trying, they become more engaged with the nuances of client behavior. They become more confident in applying their clinical reasoning. They become more willing to share mistakes and learn from them. And they become more receptive to feedback. Conversely, Reed et al. In 2012, their research shows that when supervision lacks positive reinforcement and clarity, that staff tend to underperform and avoid taking initiative. This lack of psychological safety can suppress even well-trained staff's willingness to generalize their skills. Without a safety net, fear of doing it wrong leads to passivity, and passive clinical work leads to stagnation. And guess who misses out the most when this happens? Our clients. It's easy to assume that when an RBT isn't taking initiative, it's because they don't care or they're not paying attention. But that assumption rarely ends up being the case. In reality, RBTs are often operating under real pressures. We've got performance anxiety, unclear boundaries, or previous experiences where initiative led to correction rather than reinforcement. Unfortunately, we can probably all relate to that one at some point in time in our past. So here are some of the most common reasons that you're going to see RBTs hesitate to take initiative. They might be afraid of making a mistake or getting in trouble, especially when supervision focuses heavily on correction over collaboration. There may be unclear expectations around flexibility. Maybe they don't know what they're allowed to do without communicating with you beforehand. They may have histories of being corrected without explanation, which is a condition that you probably also would rather avoid altogether than risk the chance of finding it again. A lack of modeled clinical risk-taking could be present. Maybe they've never seen someone else try something new, fail safely, and be supported through that process. These conditions lead to what we call learned compliance. RBTs follow the written plan exactly, even when it's clearly not working, because deviating feels too unsafe. Research in our human service area echoes this pattern. Reed and Parsons in 2012 emphasized that staff often become passive when supervision fails to reinforce initiative and instead prioritizes procedural adherence alone. When initiative isn't met with support, it extinguishes. Creating a safety net means recognizing that hesitation isn't resistance. It's a product of the learning environment. And as we know, that's something that we can change. So here are some strategies to intentionally build a safety net that supports reflection, initiative, and confident decision-making in your RBTs. First, use clear behavior-specific language to outline when your RBTs have flexibility and when they need to consult with you. This is going to reduce the ambiguity and it'll build trust between you and your RBT. To give you an example of what to say here, you could try, if you see a small behavior shift and want to try a different prompt, go for it. But if there's aggression, please call me in. We also want to frame flexibility as a permission, not a risk. So this is going to reduce fear and increase autonomy in our RBTs. You could try saying to them, it's totally okay to try that in the moment. If it doesn't work, we'll figure out why together. We also want to make it clear that getting it wrong doesn't mean getting in trouble. So share your own mistakes and how you learned from them. You could say something like, I once pushed a transition too fast and it backfired. What helped me was learning to read the specific cue. Now, we also want to praise the reasoning and initiative behind our actions, even if the result wasn't perfect. This is going to strengthen reflective thinking. Being able to provide praise like, I love that you noticed something was off and made a change. That kind of thinking is exactly what we want. We also want to debrief mistakes in a way that focuses on shared learning and not evaluation. So being able to say something like, let's talk about what happened and why so that we can both learn from it. This is a much more positive way to say, let me help you, let's learn. When these strategies are embedded into your supervision style, you reinforce a learning culture that prioritizes growth over perfection, which is exactly what our field needs more of. So let's see how some of these work in action. We have our RBT, Cassie, who is working with a client that begins to show early signs of escalation. We're in a group instruction setting when this happens. So Cassie notices it, but she hesitates. She's not sure if she's allowed to change the task or if it would be seen as going off plan. So our client escalates and eventually is hitting. In supervision, you ask that question. So did you notice anything before it got that intense? And Cassie replies that she kind of noticed that the client was getting fidgety and started avoiding eye contact a little. But she didn't want to change any of the instruction without asking you first. So in supervision, this is a great opportunity to walk through some of these safety net strategies. First, let's define what's okay to try on your own. If you see early signs of fidgeting, it's totally within your scope to offer a short break. If the client escalates and becomes unsafe, that's the line where you call me in. So here we clearly defined with Cassie what was acceptable, what needed our help. Then we might say something like, Cassie, it's okay to use your judgment in the moment when things feel off. I trust you to do that. But if it doesn't go perfectly, we'll debrief and we'll learn from it together. We then want to make her feel comfortable enough to say this. So you want to add in there. Honestly, Cassie, I've frozen in similar situations before. It's not always easy to make the call. What helped me, though, was identifying a few green light strategies ahead of time. Then we can tell her. Cassie, the fact that you noticed her cues shows really strong awareness development. And that is exactly the kind of decision making that I want to support you at strengthening. Let's unpack this together, not to assign blame, but to see what we can learn. What do you think that you would try next time differently in a moment like that? All right, fast forward. You've still got Cassie, except for the next week, she's more confident. She's proactively pausing instruction when similar behaviors arise and debriefing with you afterwards. How cool is that? She's reflecting more, she's checking in more, and beginning to trust her clinical voice because she knows that she won't be punished for trying. She'll be supported for thinking. A strong safety net empowers action, and that action drives growth. When RBTs know that they're trusted to notice, to try, and to think, even when they're not sure, they grow. Their confidence grows, their skills grow. And as their clinical judgment strengthens, so does their impact on the clients that we serve. Because the ultimate goal isn't just RBT growth, it's client progress. That is what we're all here for in the first place. It's meaningful behavior change. It's long-term quality of life. So this work, the modeling, the permission giving, the scaffolding of trust and accountability, it's not just good supervision. It's the foundation of good service. And the quality of care that we provide, that grows too. Check out in your course workbook for a practice tool to help BCBAs identify how their language, structure, and coaching methods impact their RBT's initiative and confidence. This centers around the 5 strategies for building a safety net that we just talked about. So, step 4. Timely feedback is the bridge between reflection and refinement. It's the moment where clinical decision-making gets shaped in real time, where the RBT doesn't just wonder if they did it right. They know how they're doing and what to do next. Feedback doesn't necessarily need to be formal to be effective either. It needs to be immediate, specific, supportive, and aligned with the goals of clinical reasoning. When feedback is delayed, the moment for learning is lost. The RBT may have forgotten what they were thinking, what led to the decision, or how they felt in the moment. That's why feedback must be tied as closely as possible to the behavior it's reinforcing or shaping, while still honoring the RBT's preferences for how the feedback is delivered. We know that each RBT is different, and how they process and receive feedback is also different. Some appreciate quick, direct comments in the moment. Others may need a quieter, private follow-up. But what matters most is that when we check in and ask, how do you prefer to receive feedback when something important comes up? Balancing immediacy with individualized delivery allows us to uphold both the science of behavior change and the relational quality of effective supervision. This idea comes straight from the behavioral principle of immediacy, one that is at the core of ABA, as we know. In simple terms, the sooner a consequence follows a behavior, the more likely that the behavior is to stick. That's why offering feedback close to the moment it's needed is so powerful. It keeps the learning loop tight, relevant, and actionable. Daniels and Bailey in 2014 also emphasized this in their work on performance management. Immediate feedback is critical to the development of new skills and behavioral fluency. Delayed feedback, while still helpful, tends to have less influence on maintaining or shaping behavior over time. Additionally, research in human services by Reed, Parsons, and Green in 2011 supports that staff who receive immediate feedback during skill acquisition are more likely to generalize their skills in natural environments. This is particularly relevant when shaping reflective clinical judgment, which is context sensitive and often nuanced. So, in short, the faster the feedback, the more powerful the learning. And the more consistently feedback is delivered in real time, the more quickly RBTs will internalize reflective, client-centered decision making. So let's talk about specificity. General praise, like great job today, feels nice, but it's not instructional. It doesn't tell our RBT what they did well, how it helped, or how to do it again. When we want to shape reflective judgment, we have to get granular. That's how we strengthen not just behavior, but that thinking behind it. Try this instead. I noticed when the client became disengaged, you paused and checked in with them before continuing. That kind of attunement is really strong clinical judgment. Nice work. This specific feedback links behavior to outcome, reinforces the thought process, helps RBTs repeat the behavior confidently, and shows that you are really watching, that you value their thinking, not just their compliance. This kind of feedback is really powerful to reinforce their behavior. According to Daniels and Bailey in 2014, pinpointing behavior clearly and trying it to natural consequences builds stronger, more lasting performance. When we describe what worked and why, we help our RBTs recognize and own their clinical instincts. This is especially meaningful for our newer RBTs who are likely second guessing their decisions all the time. Specific, supportive feedback becomes the foundation for confident judgment over time. Now, feedback isn't just something that you deliver, it's something that you share. When it's ongoing and conversational, it becomes part of your relationship with the RBT, not just a correction or a comment. Think of it like narrating the game while you're coaching it. When we reflect with the RBT rather than at them, we invite them into the process of learning. It doesn't have to be formal or wait until the end of the session. It can happen in passing, in the moment, or during a natural pause, softly, privately, and in a tone that tells them, we're in this together. For example, I saw you shift the materials when she got frustrated. That was great reading of her cues. Tell me a little bit more about what you noticed there. When we turn these moments into back and forth reflections, we strengthen connection, we reinforce clinical judgment in real time, we normalize shared decision making. And the result? RBTs feel heard, trusted, and more likely to keep reflecting and refining because they know that their voice is a part of the conversation. Effective feedback doesn't just reinforce behavior. It reconnects the RBT to why they chose this work in the first place. Most of our RBTs entered the field because they wanted to make a difference. They cared deeply about their clients, even when the job is tough. When we tie feedback to client outcomes, we transform the experience from task evaluation to meaningful impact. And this matters. Say something like this to your RBT when you think about it. What you did helped the client stay in session longer. That's a huge win. And you figured it out by staying present and adjusted. Nice job. Now, this kind of feedback does more than just shape future behavior. It reminds the RBT that their presence, insight, and effort matters. It connects those dots between decision making and the client's quality of life. It taps into pride, fulfillment, and purpose. And it works. Research even shows that purpose-driven work is a powerful motivator. When staff can see how their actions contribute to positive outcomes, they're more likely to sustain those behaviors and feel professionally invested. So when we offer feedback, we're not just correcting or reinforcing, we're helping. We're helping our RBTs see that they are a part of something bigger. Their clinical growth fuels client growth, and clinical progress is the reason we're all here. Do you want to explore your default approach in supervision? Check out your course workbook for a quick quiz titled, "What's Your Feedback Style?" This is going to allow you to reflect on your typical patterns and discover your supervision identity. This quiz is going to help you recognize whether you're more of a fixer, a cheerleader, a clinical coach, or strategic supervisor, and what that means and how you give feedback. So once you've taken that quiz, come back to this section so that we can explore how to shift your identity and strengthen your feedback presence. Okay, now that you've taken the quiz and you've explored your default feedback style, let's zoom out and reflect. How do you see yourself when you give feedback? Are you a corrector, a cheerleader, a fixer? What if you shifted your identity to that of a clinical coach, someone whose primary goal is to grow thinkers, not just performers? Someone who uses every feedback moment as an opportunity to shape not just what the RBT does, but how and why they think. This identity shift transforms feedback from a task to a relationship, from a reaction to an intentional practice. Let's look at how we could adopt this mindset into your next session. Here are some phrases to think about using, or just to be thinking about being. I'm not here to fix, I'm here to develop. This isn't a mistake. It's a moment to grow awareness. Feedback isn't about compliance. It's about confidence. So now that you've explored your feedback style, here's a tool to help you shift your delivery into something more intentional, supportive, and reflective. I want you to think of this framework as a way to turn any feedback moment into a micro coaching opportunity, a moment where you develop your RBT's thinking, not just their behavior. It's a practical structure that you can return to over and over again, especially when shaping clinical judgment on the fly. So use this easy to remember structure to coach reflective judgment on the spot. You ready? Point out what you saw. Label the behavior or decision-making process, connect the behavior to an outcome, and make it a two-way process. What this could look like in real action. I saw you pause when he looked away. That is strong clinical attunement. It helped him stay in the session. Now, what did you see that made you pause? This structure keeps feedback collaborative, anchored in purpose, and centered around the RBT's thought process, not just their actions. All right, so check out your course workbook for the feedback replay and rewrite exercise. This activity is designed to help you grow your feedback fluency. It's going to guide you to reflect on real supervision moments, assess how you responded, and rewrite your feedback with intention and impact. By walking through this process, you're going to practice delivering feedback that's timely, specific, supportive, reflective, and outcome focused. Remember, it's not about getting it right. It's about getting better at giving feedback that builds clinical thinking and confidence. Because how we respond in the moment can shape how our RBTs show up in the future. Use this tool to turn everyday supervision into transformational coaching. Timely, thoughtful feedback and supervision is action. It's how we shape not just behavior, but thinking. When RBTs receive feedback that is supportive, reflective, and immediate, they begin to internalize clinical reasoning, not just memorize procedures. That's how we build depth. And when our RBTs grow in confidence and competence, clinical care improves moment by moment, decision by decision. Feedback isn't just a tool, it's a thread that holds clinical growth together. We are on to step 5. Now, ownership is what transforms training into trust. When RBTs begin to take initiative, to reflect without being prompted, to analyze their own decisions, to ask deeper questions, we know that we are doing more than shaping behavior. We're building critical thinkers. This step is about gradually releasing responsibility. Instead of the supervisor holding all the clinical reasoning, we start scaffolding the process so that our RBTs begin to carry it themselves. This is the moment we stop steering and start handing over the wheel. So let's explore how to help RBTs take confident ownership in their clinical growth and decision-making process. Now, transferring ownership isn't just a feel-good strategy. It's also evidence-based. Studies on performance feedback and self-evaluation show us that staff who engage in self-monitoring and reflective practices maintain skills more consistently over time. When our RBTs evaluate their own performance, they become more fluent and independent in their decision-making. Now, Daniels and Bailey in 2014 emphasized that the most meaningful learning happens when individuals give space to try, reflect, and adjust on their own, while still receiving feedback that anchors them to effective practices. In educational settings, the gradual release of responsibility model mirrors this approach. First, we model, then we guide, and finally, we let our learners take the lead with support close by. In short, when our RBTs are coached to think like clinicians, not just perform like technicians, they grow into confident, adaptive, client-centered practitioners. That growth is sustained not by supervision alone, though, but by the internalized thinking habits we help them build. So how do we make this happen for our RBTs? How do we go from guiding their decisions to watching them take initiative, reflect in real time, and confidently act with clinical intent? Well, it starts with shaping ownership like any other behavior, with clarity, consistency, and reinforcement. These strategies aren't abstract ideas. They're actionable tools that can be practiced, modeled, and shaped, just like teaching any other new skill. And here is how to coach each one of them effectively. All right, so we want to start with structured reflective prompts that intentionally fade as your RBT becomes more fluent in processing their clinical decisions. So initially you might ask, hey, what did you notice when you paused the demand? And as their skills grow and shift, you can make your prompts more broad, like walk me through your decision. Eventually, your RBT may initiate this reflective process independently. You want to model this shift by verbalizing your own clinical reasoning too. For example, here's what I noticed, here's why I paused, and here's what I was considering. And then invite them to mirror this narrative over time. You want to reinforce any attempt at using reflective language and clinical reasoning, even if it's incomplete. It's a start. Let's reinforce that, right? The goal is to maintain the expectation of deep thinking while fading your level of support. You want to introduce consistent reflection prompts into your supervision process using tools like whiteboards or notebooks or digital forms. Ask questions like, what was your goal in that moment? What would you try next time? What cues did you notice that guided your decision? We want to look at how we can help them build the habit of self-evaluation. So coach this by using prompts in post-session discussions. So at first, guide their responses, then fade your support as they begin to initiate these reflections independently. Remember, again, we want to reinforce effort and depth over correctiveness. This is going to teach them the habit of clinical reflection, not just the ability to answer questions. Now, think reinforcement. Your words shape how your RBTs see their role. Swap out generic praise like nice job for feedback that highlights the thinking behind their actions. Like, that was a strong clinical call. Nice job. Tell me what guided that choice. That was awesome. You adjusted based on what you saw. Nice clinical thinking. Now, this style of feedback reinforces autonomy and helps your RBTs internalize the language of decision making. Coach this by consistently describing why a strategy was effective, not just what occurred. This lays the groundwork for the RBT to eventually describe their own reasoning in similar ways. Hey man, that was a solid call. You handled that situation with clinical awareness. What led you to that choice? That was awesome. Ownership grows in an environment where mistakes are treated as data, not failure. As supervisors, we must allow our RBTs the opportunity to experiment with strategies, especially and most importantly, in those low risk situations, so that they can learn what works and what doesn't work and why. You want to give them permission to try, reflect, and refine. So let's say your RBT attempts a redirection strategy that doesn't stop the behavior, but also doesn't escalate it. Instead of correcting immediately, you might say, what was your plan there? Or tell me about what you saw that made you choose that strategy. Another example might be if an RBT implements a transition warning that doesn't quite work. In your debrief, rather than saying, next time, do it this way, you could ask, what made you decide to give that type of warning? And what do you think that you might want to tweak next time? By shifting into collaborative analysis, you're reinforcing clinical thinking while preserving their autonomy. Coach this by normalizing error as part of learning. Reinforce initiative, even when the outcome isn't perfect. I know that I've drilled this one so far, but it is so important for the process of learning. Share your own learning moments to model vulnerability and openness. We were all new learners at some point in time. And it's these shared experiences that are going to build trust and encourage reflection without defensiveness, which is how we're going to learn, right? That's how everybody learns. Help your RBTs to build foresight by inviting them to think ahead. Instead of only debriefing what just happened, ask questions that might promote future planning. For example, what's your plan if this behavior happens again? What cues will you watch for next session? You want to coach this skill by incorporating it into your pre-session check-ins and your supervision debriefs. So reinforce any effort of them being able to predict, prepare, or problem solve proactively. It's not about the perfect answer. It's about building the habit of clinical anticipation. Now, these strategies are going to nudge the shift from dependency on the supervisor to internalization of clinical judgment. You're not disappearing as a supervisor, don't worry. You're becoming their safety net, not just their steering wheel. So let's look at what transforming ownership can look like in practice. Here's our scenario. We've got our RBT, Jasmine, working with a client who exhibits frequent task refusal. During our session, she pauses a demand as the client begins to escalate and instead offers a break and a choice board. So the client calms and re-engages. As the supervisor, you watch this all unfold. Instead of jumping in with praise or correction, you simply say to her when you get the chance, walk me through your thinking when you saw him start to escalate. You see Jasmine thinking about it. She's reflecting. Well, he started clenching his fists and looking away. Usually that means he's about to drop to the floor. I thought that a break would prevent that. Here's the perfect opportunity for you as the supervisor to jump in. Hey, Jasmine, that's an excellent clinical judgment. You observed a precursor, adjusted your strategy, and preserved the session. What would you do if that didn't work next time? Now, by reinforcing Jasmine's thought process and prompting anticipatory thinking, you're not just approving a behavior. You're coaching her reflection, reinforcing her autonomy, and helping her connect her actions to outcomes. This is how ownership is built. It's built one decision, one reflection, and one reinforced process at a time. But let's be real. Not every RBT will respond immediately to reflective coaching. Some may struggle to see the bigger picture. Others may rely heavily on concrete directions, and a few may even appear disengaged. This doesn't mean that ownership is out of reach, though. It just means that we need to shape it more intentionally. So let's now take a look at some coaching and training strategies for when this process feels like it's stuck and not moving forward. If your RBT isn't engaging in reflection, it may be a sign that they just don't yet fully understand what's expected of them. So let's break down the reflective task like any other skill. Model it, label it, prompt it, reinforce it, even the basic approximations. Use direct statements like, here's what reflective training looks like, or when I ask you to walk me through your decision, here's what I'm looking for. Consider task analyzing the reflective process if needed. You can apply BST here also. Model the thought process out loud, role play hypothetical client scenarios, prompt the RBT to respond with reasoning, and give feedback on the process, not just the content. For example, you might role play a scenario and say, tell me what you do next and why. Then offer reinforcement for their reasoning, even if their choice needs correction. Instead of expecting full debriefs, try bite-sized check-ins. What did you see? What was your intention there? What might you try differently? These mini reflections can be built into transitions between tasks or as part of natural breaks. Start small and reinforce each step towards fuller reflection. You can use visuals, timers, short written reflections if verbal responses are too difficult. If your RBT's thought process is completely off track, but they attempted to explain it, it's still a win. You want to acknowledge that effort. You could say something like, I love that you're thinking through your strategy. Let's look at what else we could have done. We want to make reinforcement contingent on the attempt at reflection and reasoning, not just the accuracy. We're going to continue to refine that accuracy. Now, sometimes our RBTs aren't reflective because they're exhausted, overwhelmed, or unsure of their role. It's okay to normalize this. You can ask questions like, what's getting in the way of thinking right now? You seem a little off. Or what would help you feel more confident doing this? This opens the door to environmental changes, like simplifying expectations or adjusting feedback methods. If an RBT is struggling, make ownership measurable. Track things like the number of initiated reflections, the use of self-monitoring tools, frequency of anticipatory statements. You want to use this data in supervision to celebrate progress and target growth areas. Turning reflective thinking into observable behaviors helps you both, you and the RBT, to see changes over time. Supporting a struggling RBT requires both compassion and precision. Keep the bar high for ownership, but match it with intentional teaching, realistic pacing, and meaningful reinforcement. Now, in your course workbook, you're going to find an activity that is designed to help you reflect on a supervision interaction and identify how you can shift more ownership to your RBT. I would encourage you to take 10 minutes to walk through the prompts and consider how your feedback can evolve from instructive to empowering. This exercise invites you to reflect on how you're currently supporting or holding back ownership in your supervision practice. So take a look at these steps. Choose one RBT and one moment where you'll let go of the steering wheel just a bit. This activity is going to be about building your fluency in coaching thinking, not just behavior. When we pass the wheel, we create drivers, not passengers. And every small shift in how we coach reflective thinking becomes a powerful nudge towards clinical independence. Here we go. We have wrapped up step 5. And now that you've explored how you're going to move from guiding reflection to shaping ownership and how you're going to do it even when it's hard, this next step, our last step, We're going to bring it all together by looking at how to unify these skills in a repeatable supervision rhythm that builds momentum across your team. Teaching reflective thinking isn't a one and done skill. It's a rhythm. And if we want RBTs to grow, supervision can't be scattered series of good intentions. It needs to feel powerful, purposeful, predictable, and progressive. In this step, we're going to focus on building a structured cadence, an intentional supervision rhythm that promotes growth over time. This means that we're going to find repeatable patterns in how we model, prompt, fade, and reinforce clinical thinking. It is going to mean building a culture where reflection is routine and not just random. We know that our RBTs learn best when expectations are consistent, feedback is timely, and routines invite participation. When the rhythm is strong, growth becomes the natural outcome. So let's explore how to structure your supervision environment so that reflective thinking isn't just encouraged, it's embedded. When our RBTs know what we expect from supervision, they engage more readily. When they understand the structure, they can prepare. And when the reflective process becomes routine, it requires less prompting and more initiative. Research on performance maintenance shows that consistent supervision paired with self-monitoring supports long-term skill retention. Similarly, organizational behavior management literature supports the idea that regular structured feedback loops improve staff performance, morale, and autonomy. The rhythm becomes the scaffold. And just like a metronome, a well-set rhythm allows flexibility, creativity, and growth without ever losing track of the beat. So how do we make this happen? Start with consistency. Schedule standing check-ins. Use the same reflections each week and build shared rituals. Predictability helps RBTs feel safe, prepared, and more willing to engage reflectively. In session, some examples of predictable routines might include always starting with a brief check-in or a preview of your session's priorities. Using a consistent warm-up question like, hey, what are we focusing on today? Ending each session with the same reflection. What went well and what would you do differently next time? Designating weekly supervision slots for deeper reflection and case discussion. Maybe using visual anchors such as a laminated cue or whiteboards or journals to maintain continuity. Maybe some examples of how this could look. Monday, there's a quick preview of weekly goals. Midweek, you'll touch again on observation and real-time prompting. Friday, reflective debrief with coaching and feedback. Wrap up the week. This rhythm tells the RBT you will always have space to think, reflect, and grow every week. We want to create a simple, reusable framework that we and our RBTs can refer to. For example, what did you notice? What did it mean? What did you do? What worked? What would you change? Repetition builds fluency. When our RBTs know the rhythm of questions, they start preparing their thoughts before supervision. Beautiful reflection starts to go on. And we want to let the team as a whole hear the beat. Reference the reflection framework in your team meetings. Give public shout outs for thoughtful debriefs. Encourage your RBTs to use this language with one another. Privately, use the same rhythm in your written and verbal feedback. Use simple tools to track reflective behaviors. Frequency of anticipatory statements, maybe use of reflective language or problem-solving strategies. These metrics create visible progress and show how RBTs are building clinical thinking as a skill, not just knowledge. This is the perfect place for me to drop my Ascend RBT assessment system as a tool and resource to do this. As part of your rhythm, this tool can be embedded into your supervision. There are pre-assessments, self-assessments, and assessments that you can utilize across 10 different clinical topics that an RBT needs to know and become proficient at. It helps you goal set, gives you periodic check-in tools, anchoring you in growth with intention of goal setting, objective, and behavior-based data. Both supervisors and RBTs can track progress using specific dimensions like communication, adaptability, self-reflection, and use the data provided to shape supervision goals and adjust coaching strategies. So when your rhythm includes reliable data, it builds buy-in and accountability from both sides. It's easy for supervision to get buried under task demands, but skipping the rhythm costs more in the long run. Short, consistent check-ins, even if just a few minutes, maintain momentum. Build time into your schedule and treat it like a non-negotiable. Supervision is important, guys. When the rhythm is protected, growth continues even amongst chaos. Here are some ways that we can keep things consistent even when everything else feels unpredictable. What do you think about these strategies? We can use brief voice memos or supervision apps to record and deliver feedback when the time is right. Use your calendar, set up recurring appointments and block them labeled as supervision non-negotiable to protect that client session time. Keep a supervision sticky note system. Jot a quick observation and reflection cue to your RBT during supervision, and then revisit it when you're able to. Have a backup plan. If a full debrief isn't possible, send a quick message that includes one reflection question for the RBT to respond to by the end of the day. That way you still stay connected somehow. Think about visual trackers and how they can be used. Maybe you put a supervision tracker on your clipboard, the wall, or a tablet, or you and the RBT can still have momentum in real time, even if it's just quick brief discussions. Consistency doesn't require perfection. It just requires intention. And even small efforts to protect the rhythm of supervision in stressful weeks reinforces the message to your RBT that your thinking matters, your growth is a priority. All right, so let's watch it in action. We have Kai. Kai is our newest RBT who tends to work reactively during sessions. You're his supervisor, and you notice that his ability to reflect on his decisions has been inconsistent, sometimes thoughtful, sometimes rushed, sometimes just non-existent. To support Kai's development, you attempted to build this predictable rhythm into your week. Monday, you got a 5-minute check-in where you ask Kai, what's your focus for this week? And helping him identify one clinical area to observe more intentionally. Then around midweek, you observe a session and jot down 2 open-ended reflection questions to ask him after the fact. And by the end of the week, you've got a standing 15-minute debrief time where Kai uses that reflection framework, remember, observe, interpret, respond, reflect, to walk through a specific decision that he made that week. So you start to notice that by that Friday reflection time, Kai is anticipating what he's going to say. He's beginning to jot down notes for himself in a small notebook. Reinforce this. You can say, I love that you're prepping your thoughts ahead of time. That's exactly how clinical thinkers develop. Yes. Now, 1 week. Whew, things get particularly chaotic and you have to cancel nearly every supervision. But you still send Kai a short voice memo with a question. What was your proudest clinical moment of the week? Kai can reply via text with a thoughtful response, and he does. The rhythm that you had in your supervision, it held up even in the storm. Even though you weren't able to be there in supervision in person, you still stayed connected to Kai and reinforced the work and the reflection that he was doing. And over time, his reflections deepened. He began offering anticipatory strategies unprompted, and even supporting another RBT in doing the same. You, as the supervisor, you didn't have to do anything elaborate. You just did something consistent, and look at how it paid off. So give it a try yourself. This interactive exercise is available in your course workbook. It's going to guide you through building a personalized rhythm of supervision for your current RBTs. You're going to identify which routines you already have in place and then choose an area to build a little bit more predictability. Draft your supervision cadence. Like, look at what your week is going to look like and how to fit all of this in. And set reminders or tools to help maintain consistency, even during the high stress weeks. Y'all, I live by my calendar. If it's not in there, I'm not going to remember doing it. So that is my consistency tool that I use to help me stay on track with different things. What do you use? In combination with this exercise. So this exercises tool is designed to help you implement the content from this training in real life. Use it to reflect, refine, and bring your supervision to life, one routine at a time. Supervision isn't a series of standalone moments. Altogether, it is a rhythm. And when that rhythm is purposeful and predictable, it creates the space for RBTs that they need to think more clearly, reflect more often, and engage with more ownership. Your consistency becomes the coaching, the routine becomes the reinforcer, and it doesn't have to be big or flashy. It just has to be repeatable. So this last step gives you the structure to embed reflection into your week, your language, your tools, and your culture. And when your RBTs begin anticipating supervision instead of avoiding it or being unsure when it's even going to happen, that's when you know the rhythm is working. So we've moved through these 6 steps, but this isn't just a checklist. It's a framework. It's a framework to transform the way that you supervise. This approach isn't about adding more to your plate. It's about changing how you show up in supervision, the supervision that you're already doing. It's about turning your minutes into momentum. So let's bring it back to the actions that drive the impact. We want to model clinical thinking out loud. Narrate your decisions, say what you're seeing, why it matters, and how you're responding so that your RBTs can learn how to think and not just what to do. Coach the thought process, not just the behavior. Don't just correct. Ask questions, prompt their reasoning, show them how to slow down and think through situations with intention. Create a culture of safety for reflection. Make reflection the easy choice. Lower the pressure, normalize curiosity and imperfection. Deliver reinforcement strategically. Reinforce how they think, not just what they do. Make values like responsiveness, anticipation, and adaptability part of the reinforcement conversation. Transfer ownership of the thinking process. Step back strategically. Prompt less. Let them lead the reflection. Reinforce initiative, not just accuracy. And build the rhythm of supervision. Set a predictable cadence. Create rituals and routines that make reflection part of the job, not just an afterthought. Now, each of these steps can stand alone, but when we use them together, they create a culture where RBTs don't just follow plans. They understand them. They question, adapt, and grow. All right, one last story. So I had one of the moments in my supervision experience was in a busy setting where I had 3 RBTs I was working with at the same time. We were all in the school system. And supervision was happening, like it had to happen, but it didn't always feel meaningful because things were so busy some days. So as I was reviewing some session notes and, looking at data and graphs and giving quick corrections, shallow stuff like remember to offer choices before prompts. I knew that I was offering supervision. It just, like I said, it was efficient but shallow. And then I was in this session one day with one of my RBTs, and our client began to escalate, early signs of escalation. And the RBT froze and looked at me and waited for me to respond before they did anything different. That moment hit me, y'all. What are they doing? Why didn't they know what to do? Why didn't they make the decision for themselves? So I took the time to reflect on this and tried something different. That next time we met, I simply asked, like, remember that day? This is what this is what I noticed about the client, the early signs. Like I was looking for different signs of escalation. His muscles get tense and his head turns a certain way. Did you notice anything in that moment? And this had my RBT pause. And they responded with, I mean, I guess I didn't know what to look for until like you helped me. So together we made a plan. They wanted to know how to look at things differently and feel more confident in what they were doing. And I wanted to help them with that. So we committed to a consistent routine. And I committed to modeling out loud what was going on for me in my head through sessions. So on Mondays, we started the week, just a quick check-in of, hey, what's the intention for the week? Wednesdays, we did an in-person observation and discussed as we could, in within the session or quickly right after, like one open-ended question. What went well, what didn't, what can we do next time? And then Fridays at the end of the week, we looked at the whole reflection and encompassed the week. So what was important to me in this work as we were shifting our focus was any clinical thinking attempts, even if they weren't perfect, I made sure that I noted that and provided some positive praise to it. And in those moments, being able to ask, hey, what would you try next time? Why? Like, let me in on your thoughts. And I noticed that over time, this RBT didn't wait as often. There wasn't the waiting and the waiting for me to give them the answer. They began making different proactive decisions and even reaching out to bring me observations that they had. And, you know, I even noticed in different meetings or in different situations, because some of us were in the same classroom, offering feedback to a coworker as they were working. And what else was cool is I didn't necessarily need to change anything about my schedule. I just became more intentional with what we were doing in those times that we were together. And I noticed that my RBTs then became more thoughtful and more engaged and even built their confidence and capability in doing the job without depending on me being there. It was really, really cool to watch the change and really to think about how instead of just supervising, I was putting myself into a coaching role and essentially coaching them to be more critical thinkers. So here's what you can try when you get to work on Monday. You don't need a full system overhaul to start making change. You just need to start, put one foot out and start walking. Here's how to bring this course to life this week. I want you to choose one RBT who could benefit from more guided reflection. Think about this person, one that shows potential but needs some scaffolding. Pick one framework strategy. Maybe it's narrating your own decisions or ending session with a consistent reflection question. Start with something doable. Start with something practical, relatable to you that you find interesting. I want you to use the workbook that comes with the course. Open the tools and use these tools to fit your goals, whether it's building rhythm, adjusting feedback, shaping ownership. You don't need to guess where to begin. It's already built there for you in these exercises. I want you to work on narrating your thinking in session. Say what you're noticing, why you're making the decision you are, and how you want them to start thinking through similar moments. Reinforce reflection the second you see it. Even a rough attempt deserves recognition. Show them that thinking out loud is not only welcomed, but it's valued. And remember, you don't have to do everything. You just have to do something on purpose. My favorite thing to say is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But let's be honest, supervision doesn't happen in a vacuum. You're going to juggle sessions, reports, parents, crises, and caseloads. So even with the best tools, barriers are going to pop up. But here's how we're going to tackle them without losing any momentum. When you say, I don't have the time, well, think, Shrink the task without shrinking the impact. Maybe use short voice memos to reflect on sessions. Text one reflection prompt instead of doing a full debrief. Add a 10-minute supervision block, even a small rhythm keeps growth alive. If you're telling yourself, my RBT isn't ready for this, that's okay. Start with one modeling and prompting. Use simple questions like, what did you notice? Or what made you decide that? Shape reflection the way we shape behavior, incrementally and with support. When you're telling yourself they don't engage in reflection, look at the response effort instead. Is this question too open-ended, too high of stakes? Try giving them some sentence starters or visuals or shared journaling. Reinforce the effort, not just the insight. If you're hearing yourself say, I just keep forgetting to follow up, make it visual. Add reflection questions to your clipboard or notes app. Use sticky notes during session to cue follow-up or build it into your rhythm. Same day, same time, same week. This is another really great time where Ascend RBT assessment system comes in. Using the Ascend RBT supervision tracker has built-in prompts that prompt you to reflect in supervision on these things that matter and create reflection. Every barrier has a behavior-based solution. You already have a skill set. You just need to apply it to your own practices. Supervision isn't a finish line, though. It's craft. And you're now armed with tools that can help keep evolving as your practice does. So here's how to sharpen your skills. Reflect on your supervision identity. Are you more of a corrector, a cheerleader, or a coach? And who do you want to become? Use the feedback identity quiz. It's in your workbook, remember? This will allow you to better understand your natural tendencies and stretch your less used muscles. Use a tool like Ascend RBT assessment system. This is a great mirror and offers measurement. It also helps to inform your goals. And it doesn't just break down these skills for RBTs, but it helps show them what's important. And using a tool like this shows them that they're important and we care about their growth. Be sure you're connecting with other BCBAs. Share what's working. Ask for ideas when you're stuck. Growth thrives in a community, and you're not the only one out there. And keep learning. My goodness, seek out literature on values-based supervision, shaping professional behaviors and reflective practices. Never stop growing and learning. And remember, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep showing up. Show up curious, show up committed, show up open to learning. You've made it. You've made it to the end. And here's what you're going to do next. Complete the post-test for this course. Submit the required evaluation, and your certificate will be mailed to you automatically. If you need any help, your contact info is in the course workbook. This work is more than compliance. It's more than checklists or faded prompts. When you coach reflective thinking, you give your RBTs the tools to navigate complexity with confidence. You build autonomy, reduce burnout, and create space for better decisions. You don't just shape behavior, you shape thinkers. And when you build thinkers, you build teams. And when you build teams, you build change. This is how our field gets better, from the inside out. And this, my friends, is the work. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me to help continue working on making our wonderful field of ABA better. Hey, before you head out, I want to leave you with one final reflection. We have covered so much in this training. You explored what it really means to coach clinical thinkers, not just teaching RBTs what to do, but how to think, how to anticipate, and how to reflect in the moment. We talked about building that rhythm, modeling your own thought process, reinforcing initiative, and creating routines where supervision becomes something predictable and supportive, not just a checkbox. So before you close this course, take just one more moment. What's one thing you're going to do differently? What's one strategy, one idea, one shift that you can bring into your supervision this week? Maybe you'll start narrating your decisions out loud so that your RBT can hear how you process clinical data in real time. Maybe you'll add one consistent reflection question to each session. Maybe it's a mindset shift, choosing to see your role not as just a supervisor, but as a coach for clinical growth. Whatever it is, capture it, write it down, say it out loud, make it real. You've already done the learning. This is your moment to move into action. And just remember, this work matters. When you invest in your RBT's growth, you're investing in better outcomes for clients, stronger teams, and a healthier, more sustainable field. You're not just shaping behavior, you're shaping thinkers, and thinkers shape change. Thank you for all of the work that you do and for letting me be a part of it. Take care. I'll see you next time.